This is your spiritual game plan, and I am your host, 𝗁 𝐵𝐵. Change, it happens to all of us. You've invested your time and energy into an important role, sometimes for years, and then suddenly it's time for you to move on. Maybe you've worked hard on a dream, and now your path is taking a new turn, but the dream isn't going with you. Perhaps you've raised your kids, and they've moved on, but now your empty nest is filled with parent care. Or maybe you're in the middle of diaper changes and laundry piles. If you find yourself asking questions like, where do I fit in anymore? Am I even relevant? How do I find my purpose now? You are in the right place. This is a show for women in a season of transition. I believe that while your roles in life will change, your purpose is eternal. I'm here to help you understand just how intentionally you were made by a creator with a game plan. Through interviews and inspirational guests, we'll discover ways to help you unlock the purpose God placed in you, develop a game plan for your life calling, and embrace the intentional masterpiece you were created to be. Today, I am talking with Susy Flory. Susy is a New York Times best-selling author and co-author. As a breast cancer survivor, Susy celebrates life by chasing great stories in places like Cuba, Haiti, Turkey, Israel, Ireland, and her own backyard. Susy believes that your story matters, and she loves to help people get their stories out so they can impact the lives of others. And today, Susy will be reminding us that by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, we can defeat our enemy. She is also going to give us a short peek into her up-and-coming book, Sanctuary, a true tale of Irish donkeys, redemption, and going home again. Susy, I am so glad that you are joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you and hear your voice, 𝗁.
Thank you. I first got to meet you at West Coast Christian Writers, and I was terrified. I was there with Sherry Gregory in a brand new world, and you were so kind, and I just remember feeling a comfort around you. So I got to see you again a little bit more intimately at Writing at the Red House, where you've been sharing a couple of projects that you work on and working with other writers. So I am so glad that I get to introduce you to my listeners. And I'd love it if you would tell me a little bit about you, your family, and what are you currently working on both personally and professionally?
Yeah, I would love to. I live in the mountains, and it's kind of funny because I really am kind of a city suburban girl from the San Francisco Bay Area. But my dad was a Texas cowboy. So I was raised on horses, loved the outdoors. So I kind of feel like I've come back to my roots, kind of a transition there. And I always wanted to be a writer. I always loved reading and words, and I loved church and learning all about God and, kind of a knowledge person. I was always raising my hand to answer questions, and the teacher would say, let the boys have a chance. So as I grew up, I really wanted to be a writer, didn't know how. And, I was a mom and I had kids. I worked at a newspaper for a while. I was a teacher, high school teacher for a while. So I've done a lot of different things. And all of those things have led me to this point. So I'm now a professional writer. I have been for about 15 years. I teach writing, so no longer teach high schoolers, but I teach writing. I've kind of settled into the genre of memoir as my favorite because I love big personal stories with, all kinds of exciting elements. And then a couple of years ago, I enrolled in seminary. So that's kind of a whole new adventure. So I'm getting close to earning my master's and just applied for a doctoral program.
Wow. Where's the fun in there? What do you do when you don't want to sit behind a screen?
Probably read books or work in the garden a little bit. I'm not that great at gardening, but I do like it.
That is so exciting. I'm not good at gardening and I don't like it. So
It
I'll
takes
go eat someone else's.
consistency. You have to be consistent, and that's really
Oh,
hard to do.
there you go. That's the problem. Well, I wanted to find some fun facts on you, and there were so many fascinating fun facts about you. Um, like I mentioned earlier, you are so down to earth. You, like you said, you were raised on the back of a horse, but then you mentioned that you can tear up a ski slope, which is awesome. I grew up skiing in Mammoth, so I like a good ski slope. You've been interviewed by Forbes magazine, and then you like to come home and finish a cross stitch. So that's quite diverse. But one of the things I love about your diversity is your music, because I love music. And so you have a retirement goal that I would love for you to share. And then also let our audience know where we might find you if there was a certain band in town.
Yeah, so I have this dream. I don't know where this came from, but I want to learn how to play the harp. And I'm not sure if it would be a big symphonic harp or more like a smaller Celtic harp, but that is a dream. I haven't done it yet, but that's my goal. And I thought it would be fun to be hired out to play at parties where you're just kind of playing in the background the harp. So have no idea where that came from, but that is my dream. And my dad was a musician too. He's a cowboy and a musician. So I love music, although I didn't quite inherit all his talent. And then I love U2 because I love all things Irish, and I just love U2. So yeah, my dream would be to somehow combine harp playing, U2 in Ireland, and that would be it. Maybe a harp shop in Ireland with U2 playing in the background. That would be my dream.
Well, you kind of had a moment with Ireland and U2 together, right? When you were
I
driving.
did. Yeah, I did. I have a book coming out in October called Sanctuary, and it's about an Irish donkey whisperer who lives in a little village in Ireland. There's a whole story there, but I had to make a couple research trips there
Yes.
in 2019 before COVID, and there was one time I was driving on the wrong side of the road. And a U2 song came on. I was driving over this hill in Ireland, and I had a friend with me who came with me, and we were just screaming because we couldn't believe the moment. It was one of those moments that I just want to think about on a bad day.
Yeah. That would be classic. That would be the best. I have one question that I ask every guest on the podcast, and that is, looking back in your life, how far back can you see the very purpose you are living out today and who you've always been?
That is such a great question. Um, I have always been a church girl. I mean, no matter what. And I have gotten mad at my church before, as many of us have. You
Yeah.
have your ups and downs with church and church people. But I just love the church. I feel like it's kind of my home base, even if I'm mad at it. And so as a teenager, I had that love, even though I was, a typical teenager. And I mean, I wasn't super holy or anything like that. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't have a clear dream. So my mom had a friend who was an occupational therapist, and she could get these really cool professional level aptitude tests that people would take to change careers when they couldn't do what they were doing anymore. So I took one, and then she sent it away to have it scored, and it came back and it said two things. I should either be a journalist or I should go into the ministry and become a pastor. And the church I was going to, girls didn't become pastors. There was just no path. It wasn't possible at all. In fact, you'd probably get in trouble if you said that, or, it just would not be received well. Let's say that. So it wasn't an option. I thought, well, that's weird. Don't they know I'm a girl? Why would they say that? So I did go into journalism, writing, related things to that. And then a few years ago, I got this strong call. When I was sitting in church, I got this feeling that I needed to go sign up for seminary, like that day. And it was such a strong feeling. I remember it felt like a blanket, just like it just came over me. And I'm not a super woohoo mystical person, although I have gotten more that way as I get older. But I immediately texted friends and said, I have to go to seminary, hold me to it. So it's kind of come full circle to that aptitude test I took when I was probably 15 or something.
I just love I love being able to look back and see what God sparks way back and then how it's coming out. So thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned that you like to write memoir. You like to help other people with their stories, and you are a New York Times bestseller that helps people with their stories. And so I might have a listener right now who says, I would never, I would never have my story published. Or this might be an episode that sparks a light in a listener that thinks, hey, I needed to write my memoir. Either way, listeners, we need you to know that your story matters. And God wants us to tell our stories. In Romans 1:12, Paul says that when we get together, I want to encourage you in your faith, but I also want to be encouraged by yours. It's so important. So I am glad to have you because you are the person who knows exactly how important a story matters. So why does that story matter?
I totally agree with you. I want to quote another verse before I give my answer, and it's in Revelation 12. And it says that as believers, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And I do believe there's something very powerful, very hard to pin down, using the word mystical again, and very life-giving and evil destroying, and that's the word of our testimony. And so memoir for a person of faith, a Christian or a person of strong faith, your memoir is part of your testimony, and it's powerful. And I've had books and stories and articles and blog posts and podcasts where a line, sometimes even just a few words, jumps out at me and changes me and stays with me. And so that can be your story. You may write your story. It may be short, it may be long. You may get it professionally edited and looked at, or you may just, write it on a napkin and get someone to type it. It does not matter. God can use it, and he may use even one line from it to answer someone's prayer or to change their life. And that did happen to me. One time I was in the bathroom reading a little self-published book. It was literally, I think, 50 pages, sort of like a pamphlet that a friend of mine, his mother, had done. And she had written all these stories, and she had a verse in there that jumped out at me. And right at that time, we'd been asked to go to Cuba on a missions trip, an illegal missions trip, actually, a humanitarian and missions trip. And it's somewhat dangerous where we were going in Cuba, and what we would be doing. We'd be smuggling things in. Don't tell anybody. And this verse popped out at me about, God being with us and being our rear guard and not to be afraid. And it just, like, I felt like it hit me in the face, like it jumped off the page. So, God used that to send me to Cuba, and that trip was life-changing for me as well. So you never know. But if you keep your story inside of you, these things are not going to happen.
Yeah, that's powerful. Telling our stories can be uncomfortable, overwhelming, vulnerable. And one of the times when I was with you at the Red House, I remember telling you that I really didn't have a life story that anyone would want to read because I really hadn't grasped the concept of memoir. And I was thinking, well, I would have to write something from birth to now, and there'd have to be a battle and a victory and overcoming. And I just didn't have all of that in my story, or at least I didn't think I had all that in my story. But you opened my eyes to the difference between memoir and autobiography, and understanding the difference has even helped me in everyday conversation. It's helped me understand, even in podcasting, just little bits here and there to share of my story. So explain the difference between memoir and autobiography.
Yeah, I think a lot of times where we get tripped up is we think of memoirs written by really famous people. So a celebrity, a politician, some sort of, figure that they want to tell their entire story, and it's 500 pages long, and they can do that. They're famous. We're not those people. And so our stories need to be a little shorter and more digestible for people so they can read it and enjoy it and, get something out of it. So it's a season of your life is a typical memoir if you're not famous. And that can be crafted into a really powerful story. And I would encourage any of you who are listening, if you want to write your story, to get some help to make it really readable, to make it so somebody actually reads it, because sometimes people get carried away and write these super long histories or family histories, and no one reads those. So making it readable is really important, and just realizing it's a season of your life typically that you're writing about. It doesn't mean you can't have backstory, you can't incorporate things from your childhood, of course, because that makes you who you are. But you want the main part of the story, kind of the framework, I guess you want to say, the framing. If you think of framing a building and that structure underneath, you want that to be kind of a season of your life where something happened to change you.
Yeah. And when we were talking prior, you mentioned even the Gospels
Mhm.
being kind of similar to a memoir. How is that?
Yeah, because if you think about it, Jesus lived on this earth as a person for 33 years, and the Gospels pretty much concentrate on the 3 years of his ministry life. So there are 30 years where we don't have much. We have a little bit from, when he was born, a little glimpse of his life when he was about 12 and hanging out with people at the temple. Otherwise, we have silence, and really it's concentrating when he started his ministry is when it kicks off. The miracle of the water turning into wine is kind of what kicks off his ministry, and this intense 3-year period, and that's it. So if you look at that as kind of almost like a memoir, although as far as we know, Jesus did not write these himself. He might have left a journal, who knows. But yeah, that was a season of his life that needed to be told. That was very important.
Yeah, I liked that when you mentioned it that way. That like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So one of the books that you wrote, So Long Status Quo, What I Learned from Women Who Changed the World. Like you mentioned, sometimes we think, oh, we have to be famous, we have to be someone. And it's easy to think that way, or I'm not a writer, I could never write this story. But that's exactly why you wrote that book. So what was the inspiration behind that? And what did you learn from those 9 women?
Yeah, it was first inspired. This is silly, but I was reading the Sunday paper back in the day when we read papers. And there was a big ad for a department store, and it had a picture of Rosie the Riveter, with her arm up saying, you can do it or we can do it. And I got really curious about who Rosie was. And I also got mad that this was being used as an ad, because I felt like it sort of demeaned it, kind of the weird obsessions of a writer. You get mad and you want to look into it. And so I started looking at women who changed the world, because Rosie was a real person. That model wasn't for that artwork, but there was a real Rosie the Riveter. She was from Kentucky, and she went in and learned how to weld into the machine shops during World War II. These were women answering the call to go and work and do men's work. And so I got curious because I had never studied women's history. We just didn't do it in school. I think we had Pocahontas and Betsy Ross, and that's about it. So I started looking into it, and I was amazed. I picked 9 women that I felt had changed the world. My favorite was actually Harriet Tubman, who I knew she had been a conductor on the Underground Railroad in the South, but that was all I knew about her. So I just wanted to dig in, and I was picturing myself sitting down to coffee at like a Starbucks with each woman and just hearing her story and trying to find out who she was as a person. And what I found out was none of them started out to change the world. None of them felt equipped or like they could do this. None of them wanted to be famous. They just had some kind of problem pop up that was in their, in front of them, that God had given them to do. And they were faithful to start and do that one thing. And then that one thing led to another thing and another thing. And it just took the courage to say yes to that. And so all of them, these 9 women, were flawed or abused or disabled or broken in some way. And Harriet Tubman herself had a horrible traumatic brain injury as a teenager from a slave master who hurt her. And when she recovered, she almost died, but when she did recover, she began to hear the voice of God audibly. Like God would talk to her and she could hear his voice out loud. And that's what helped her survive on the Underground Railroad and know where to go and where not to go, stay off that bridge, that kind of thing. So I just felt encouraged by that. These were, messed up, broken women who God used in incredible ways.
We could just keep talking about Harriet.
I know, there's so much to say about her. I love her.
That's awesome. So I hope the listener is realizing just how important their story is. I know for me, my biggest hurdle is fear. I mean, I want to make an impact for God, but I'm going to I tell women this all the time, Satan is going to have you second guess your own calling all the time. But I also start thinking, I don't have anything of value to say. I'm not smart enough. Who would even want to hear this? So we've kind of covered this a little bit throughout the talk, but what advice would you give to that listener on how they could take action and even share a part of their story that could change a life?
Yeah, I can only share what's helped me over my life. And the first thing I would say is those fears never go away. Mm-hmm. So I've written 16 books now. I have several more in the pipeline. I've, won some awards, had some success with books, and I still feel everything you named, I still feel. So those don't go away. And once I realized that, I then thought, well, I'm going to have to live with this. And these are just companions along the journey, but they're not going to stop me. They can sit in the corner if they want to, but they're not going to stop me. Another thing that's really, really helped me, because there is opposition. I mean, what you're saying is absolutely true. If you're a writer and you write about faith, in your own spiritual journey and about God and things like that, you're going to face a lot of opposition, and it comes in different ways. So I've had a prayer team at different times when I'm writing. And one thing I tell people to do is pray for God. Just ask God to send people to pray for you, because the people who pray are not always who you suspect. It may not be your pastor. It may not be, your saintly mother-in-law or whatever. It may not be those people. It may be an odd person you don't suspect who pops up and says, how can I pray for you? And then you have a few of those people praying for your writing, and things will start to change for you.
That is so true. And even as you said that, you just don't think about it till someone like you just saying that. And yeah, I've had random people I'll get a text. How can I pray for you? It's like, wow, that's powerful.
It gives me chills, you just even saying that, because it's so true. Yeah. God will send people to help you. And there is something about having these people pray for you. The first person who really prayed for me, other than probably my mom or my grandma, with writing was an old lady at my church. And she just would come by, and I'd see her every week. I think she came to fold bulletins or something. And I was working at the church at the time, part-time, and she'd say, how can I pray for you? And I started to realize, there's something here. And she became this amazing supporter. And I do feel like that's why I was able to be a writer. It's because of her praying for me.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I come across women that think that in order to understand how relevant they are, it has to be some big unveiling, being discovered, being, validated in some huge form. But yet it's, I think of Anna, and just that one moment where she was faithful and God blessed her, but she just prayed and prayed and prayed, and no one knew. And it was just a little old lady. And yet it's so That's powerful, right. So powerful.
Yeah. Jesus recognizing that woman, putting her little pennies, she was the one that he noticed. So yeah. That's what our writing is. It's our little mites.
Pennies. I like that. So how did you grow into the love of stories? Where did that start?
I really do think it came from my mom. I love to read, I always loved books. I would go to the library. My mom would take us, and I'd always, come home with a stack. But my mom was Irish, and she thought she was an Irish princess, actually, from Irish chieftain. She had this whole kind of story for herself. And she could tell a great story, and she ended up writing a couple of books that she self-published, and they're just treasures. But she knew how to tell a story to hook you. And that's something I work really hard to teach people with memoir, ordinary people, not professional writers, ordinary people, but how to hook your reader and give them a promise of something that's going to happen in this story that makes them want to read it. And so she was good at that. And then, of course, when you're telling a story or a joke, you have a punchline. When you're writing a story or a memoir, you have a high point, a climax, an epiphany. We call it a lot of different things. But basically, you got to hook that reader and then pull them to this moment that's going to maybe be life-changing for them. So yeah, an Irish storyteller mama.
Well, when you mentioned that arc, I still see it so visually, and you so graciously sent me a copy of the arc when I was with you last. It was right before COVID, right before COVID at
That's
the
right.
Red House.
Was that in January?
Yes.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were writing the book that we're going to talk about in a second here, The Sanctuary, and you had that arc, and you were explaining how each thing, coming up to the top, the climax, and coming, and I just, that's such a good visual. And so you were using that because you were writing Sanctuary, which is one of the books that is coming out. You've written, helped over a dozen people write their memoirs. And I have to tell you, many of my listeners know we moved from Washington to Tennessee, and we're going through and just kind of cleaning through stuff. And there is your book, Dog Tales, from when my kids were little.
Oh.
So you were a part of my family like over 12 some years ago. I was so touched when I saw that. I was like, oh my word, I remember reading this to the boys. I read Thunder Dog, which is still one of my all-time favorites. And The Sky Below and She Believes, and then yes, Dog Tales. And now I cannot wait till Sanctuary comes out. Give us a little bit of a preview on that book.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I got a random email, kind of a cold call off of my website. And this guy named Patrick, who said he was from Ireland. And immediately, as a journalist, I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me. Patrick from Ireland, and he had grown up on Ireland's donkey sanctuary. His father had started it. And Patrick had all sorts of problems, as we all do. He had things happen in his life, including some PTSD from being in the army and seeing some horrible things. And he came back to Ireland and worked at the donkey sanctuary, and the donkeys saved his life. And so his dad never knew that starting this donkey sanctuary to rescue donkeys would actually rescue his own son. And so he told me a little of that in this email, and I immediately was checking it out because I didn't believe it. And it was a true story and the real deal. And there's also at the heart of it a strong spiritual awakening story, God, reaching down and saving this person story. And so I was super excited and couldn't wait to meet him and to see all of this in person. And, donkeys, I just love that. Donkeys are the silliest animals in the world. And just to think that they are smart and wise and compassionate and healing. I fell in love with the story before anyone else did.
I'm so excited to read that. And there's romance, right?
There is romance. Yes, there is an Irish girl from his village who prayed for him.
Wow.
And he didn't know it. And so, yeah. And she's wonderful.
Oh, how powerful. I loved watching that journey. Because Marcy had that drone, and
that's right, Marcy. Our friend Marcy. We have a mutual friend named 𝗵𝐺𝐸 Seither. Hey Marcy, if you're listening.
Yes, we'll send this to her. She just moved to Tennessee too.
That's right. That's right.
She's about 3 hours from me though.
That's right. And she and I were at Kathy Lip's Red House, which is also something we have in common. And I turned to her and I said, hey, Marcy, you want to go to Ireland?
Who would say no? Why didn't you turn to me?
It was so fun. So she came and took pictures and, was part of the journey. But yeah, Ireland truly is, and maybe it's because I'm in love with it, but it truly is a magical place. And Christianity, I've learned this through seminary and some writing and stuff I've done on this, but Christianity came very early to Ireland. They think maybe even in the 200s through traders. And so they are a very spiritual people. And St. Patrick was a real person, and just, the faith, there's a strong faith in Ireland that sometimes they don't see as much here anymore, which is, I think part of this story as well.
That's exciting. And we're recording this the day before St. Patrick's Day.
That's right. That's right.
Exciting. Well, I'm hoping that our time together has encouraged someone to share their story and has lit a passion for someone to either write it or connect with you to write their story. And you have a Facebook group, Everything Memoir, and all those links will be in the show notes. But as we close, what would you like to leave my listeners with today?
I would just say that your own story matters. You can't compare your story to anyone else's, either the style of the writing, the mastery level you're at. No matter what, I just think it's important to get it out and get it down, because God has a plan for it. And if you feel at all the urge to write your story, I want to encourage you that even a line or a phrase or an idea or a word picture from your story can stay with someone the rest of their lives and be a comfort, be a light, just be a message from God. I mean, what a cool thing to be able to carry a message from God. Maybe you're not even trying, but he has something for somebody who's going to read it. So your story matters, and you need to get it out on paper, on a napkin, on a piece of notebook paper, however you can do it, just get it out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
You're welcome, Sherry. Thanks for having me.
Your story matters. And if you feel the urge or the calling to write your story, do it. If you need help, like most of us do, no matter what it takes, get it down on paper and get help if you need it. But do not leave this earth with your story still inside of you. Because stories take on a life of their own and they change others' lives. And stories push back the darkness and help us overcome. I hope you were blessed by my time with Susy Flory. Links to connect with Susy, find out more about her books, or join her Facebook group, Everything Memoir, are in the show notes. Have you subscribed to this podcast? If not, please do so. That way you do not miss any up-and-coming episodes, and I value your feedback. Here's a review I just received. Your message has really hit home with me. I had tears running down my face as I listened to your words of God's love. Thank you so much for working hard. You are lifting up so many women, one person at a time. Then we go forward and try our best to lift up the next person. Now that is a great spiritual game plan. When you leave a rating and a review, it helps to get the word out about the podcast. It also lets me know how I can continue to serve you. During today's episode, did a friend come to mind who you know would be blessed? If so, I would love it if you'd share a link with them. Listeners like you sharing links with others is how this podcast can reach more people. I'd love to have you join my mailing list. I send out a weekly update with more of a personal touch and information about new episodes before they come out. Thank you so much for tuning into Your Spiritual Game Plan, the podcast that helps you understand that God has a plan and you have a purpose in it.